October, 1944. The Vosges Mountains of eastern France stood draped in fog so thick you couldn't see your own boots. The air was cold, wet, heavy, the kind of damp that seeped through wool and steel and settled into your bones. Visibility was less than 50 yards. The sound was muffled, distorted. A man could be 10 feet away, and you'd never know until he was on top of you. High on a ridge overlooking the town of Bruyères, Private First Class William Brophy lay prone behind a fallen oak tree, his Springfield M1903A4 rifle resting on a makeshift sandbag. His breath came in slow, controlled intervals. His finger rested lightly on the trigger guard. Not the trigger. Not yet. Through the fog, through the scope that was fogged over and useless, he could hear them. Boots, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Marching in formation down the valley road, heading straight toward the American line. The 36th Infantry Division, Texas boys, mostly, was dug in along a thin defensive perimeter just outside Bruyères. They were exhausted, undersupplied, and outnumbered 3-1. Intelligence said a full German regiment was moving to counterattack, supported by armor and artillery. If they broke through, the entire Allied advance in the Vosges would collapse. Brophy's commanding officer had given him one order. If you see an officer, take the shot. We need to slow them down. But Brophy couldn't see anything. The fog was impenetrable. His scope was worthless. And even if he could see, the target, if there was a target, would be over 1,000 yards away, maybe more. Standard doctrine said snipers don't shoot beyond 800 yards. Beyond that, wind drift, bullet drop, and human error made precision impossible. In fog? Forget it. You'd have better odds throwing the bullet. But William Brophy had grown up hunting elk in the mountains of Montana. He'd learned to shoot by sound, by intuition, by reading terrain he couldn't see. He knew how sound traveled in fog. He knew how to calculate distance by the echo of boots on cobblestone. And so, without clearance, without a spotter, without even being able to see his target, William Brophy made a decision. He chambered a round, adjusted for what he thought was the right elevation, aimed at a sound in the fog, and fired. The bullet traveled for 3 seconds, and when it hit, an entire German regiment stopped moving. 6 days earlier, inside a half-collapsed farmhouse near the town of Saint-Dié-des-Vosges, William Brophy sat on a crate of rations while his platoon leader, Lieutenant Daniel Corrigan, briefed the sniper teams attached to the 36th Infantry Division. Visibility in the Vosges is going to be near zero, Corrigan said, spreading a topographical map across a makeshift table. Fog rolls in every morning and doesn't lift until noon, sometimes later. You will not have line of sight. You will not have clear shots. You will wait for conditions to improve. He looked around the room at the 8 sniper teams, 16 men in total. Most were young, barely 20. A few had seen action in Italy. None had operated in terrain like this. Corrigan continued. Standard engagement rules apply. No shots beyond 800 yards. No shots without spotter confirmation. No shots in low visibility unless you have a clear, identified target. We are not wasting ammunition on ghosts. One of the snipers, a corporal from Alabama named Hayes, raised his hand. Sir, what if we hear movement but can't see it? Then you don't shoot, Corrigan said flatly. You report it. Artillery handles blind fire, not snipers. You shoot what you can see, and only what you can confirm as enemy. Understood. The room murmured agreement. Brophy said nothing. He just stared at the map, tracing the ridgelines with his eyes, calculating angles, elevations, wind patterns. Outside, the Vosges campaign was entering its most brutal phase. On September 15th, the U.S. 7th Army had pushed into the Vosges Mountains, a heavily forested region on the French-German border. The goal was to break through the mountains, cross the Rhine, and invade Germany from the south. But the terrain was a nightmare. Steep ridges, narrow valleys, dense forests. Roads were few and easily defended, and the weather, constant rain, fog, and cold, turned every advance into a slog. The Germans knew the value of the Vosges. If they held the mountains, they could delay the Allied advance for months. So they dug in. Reinforced bunkers, pre-sighted artillery, minefields, and they waited. American casualties were mounting. Infantry units were getting chewed up trying to take ridges they couldn't see. Tank support was useless. The roads were too narrow, the mud too deep. Air support was grounded by weather. The only advantage the Americans had was snipers, men who could move quietly, pick off officers, disrupt German command and control. But even that advantage disappeared when the fog rolled in. And so the rule was clear: don't shoot unless you can see the target. For William Brophy, that meant sitting on ridges for hours, waiting for the fog to lift, listening to German patrols move below him, and doing nothing. It meant watching American infantry get pinned down by machine gun fire he could hear but not see. It meant frustration, helplessness, and a growing sense that the rules were getting his friends killed. But Brophy wasn't reckless. He was patient, methodical. He'd been trained at Fort Benning's sniper school, where instructors drilled into him the fundamentals: breathing, trigger control, range estimation, wind reading. He'd scored expert marksman in every qualification. He knew his weapon, knew his limits. What the Army didn't know, what even his spotter didn't fully understand, was that William Brophy had spent his entire childhood in the Montana wilderness, hunting in conditions that would make most men quit. He'd tracked elk through blizzards, shot grouse in dense timber, learned to judge distance by the angle of a hillside and the depth of a shadow. He didn't need to see a target to know where it was. He just needed to listen. And in 3 days' time, that skill, honed in the mountains of Montana, refined in the forests of France, would allow him to do something no sniper had ever done before: stop an entire regiment with a single shot fired blind into the fog. Because sometimes the impossible isn't impossible. It just looks that way to everyone who hasn't spent a lifetime learning to see without eyes. William Joseph Brophy was not born a soldier. He grew up in the remote backcountry of western Montana. In a valley so isolated, the nearest town was 30 miles away over dirt logging roads that washed out every spring. His father, Joseph, was a hunting guide who led wealthy clients from Chicago and New York into the Bob Marshall wilderness to shoot elk, bear, and bighorn sheep. His mother, Catherine, ran a small trading post that sold supplies to trappers, loggers, and the occasional lost tourist. William grew up with a rifle in his hands before he could read. By the time he was 8, he could field dress a deer. By 12, he was guiding clients on his own. By 15, he could hit a running elk at 400 yards with iron sights, adjusting for wind he felt on his face, and distance he judged by the size of the animal in his vision. He didn't hunt for sport. He hunted for survival, meat for the winter, hides to sell. Predators that threatened livestock. Every shot mattered because ammunition cost money, and money was scarce. Miss a shot, and you might not eat that week. Even as a boy, William saw the wilderness through patterns. He noticed how sound traveled differently in fog versus clear air, how wind swirled in valleys but moved in straight lines across ridges, how animals positioned themselves based on terrain, and how you could predict their movement before you ever saw them. His father taught him to shoot by sound. They'd go into the forest before dawn, when fog hung so thick you couldn't see 20 feet. His father would throw rocks into the brush, and William had to point the rifle at the sound, adjust for distance, and pull the trigger. Later, his father would check where the bullet hit. A tree, the ground, a stump. William learned to judge distance by echo, by the time it took for sound to travel, by the way noise bounced off unseen terrain. He didn't join the army because he wanted to be a soldier. He enlisted in 1942 because his father had died in a logging accident, the trading post was failing, and the draft was coming anyway. At least the army paid a steady wage. At least they'd feed him. By the time William arrived at Fort Benning for infantry training, he was 22 years old, lean and wiry, with hands calloused from years of gutting game and splitting firewood. During rifle qualification, he scored perfect marks at every distance. An instructor noticed and asked if he'd ever considered sniper school. William shrugged. "I've been shooting since I could walk." "Can you hit a target at 600 yards? "In what conditions?" The instructor blinked. "Clear conditions, no wind." William thought about it. "If I can see it, I can hit it." They sent him to sniper school. He graduated top of his class. Not because he was the best at following doctrine. He wasn't. He skipped steps, ignored protocols, took shots instructors said were impossible. But he never missed. By the time William Brophy arrived in France in August 1944, he'd already earned a reputation. Other snipers called him the Ghost because he moved through forests without making a sound. Officers called him Brophy the Hunter because he tracked German patrols like they were elk herds. His first confirmed kill came outside Nancy. A German officer 720 yards away, giving orders to a machine gun crew. William took the shot during a rainstorm. The bullet hit the officer in the chest. The machine gun crew scattered. Infantry advanced. No American casualties. His fifth kill came in the Vosges, a sniper duel. German spotter and shooter positioned on a ridge across a valley. William waited for 6 hours, motionless, watching. The German sniper finally shifted to take a shot at American infantry below. William fired. The German dropped. The spotter ran. By October, William had 11 confirmed kills. But what the records didn't show, what no one except his spotter knew, was that William had fired 19 shots total. 11 confirmed hits, 8 misses. Except they weren't misses. They were shots fired at sounds he couldn't see, at targets he calculated were there based on terrain and tactics. 8 times he'd fired into fog or darkness or dense brush. 8 times German patrols had stopped, turned back, or gone quiet. No bodies were found. No confirmations, just disrupted enemy movement and American units that advanced without contact. William never reported those shots. He knew what would happen. Reprimand, maybe worse. So he kept quiet, took his confirmed kills, and filed the other shots away as lessons learned. But the truth was, William Brophy was learning something no other sniper in the European theater understood. Sometimes you don't need to see the target. Sometimes you just need to know it's there. And in 2 days' time, that knowledge, combined with a sound in the fog and a calculation made in 3 seconds, would stop 2,000 German soldiers in their tracks and save an entire division from annihilation. Because sometimes the best shot isn't the one you see, It's the one you feel. On the morning of October 20th, 1944, the fog in the Vosges Mountains was worse than anyone had seen in weeks. It rolled down from the peaks like a living thing, thick and gray, swallowing ridges, valleys, roads. By 600 hours, visibility was down to 30 yards. By 700, it was 15. William Brophy lay on a ridge 1,200 feet above the town of Bruyères, hidden in a shallow depression behind a fallen oak. His spotter, a kid from Ohio named Tommy Vickers, lay beside him with a pair of binoculars that were completely useless. "I can't see a damn thing," Tommy muttered, wiping condensation from the lenses for the 5th time. "Put them down," William said quietly. "Listen." They listened. At first, nothing. Just wind in the trees, the distant crackle of small arms fire from the town below. But then, faintly, something else, a rhythmic sound, boots on stone, lots of them. Tommy frowned. That's a lot of movement." William nodded. He'd heard it 10 minutes ago. Now it was getting louder. The German counterattack was coming. Intelligence had warned them. The 16th Volksgrenadier Division, a full regiment, maybe 2,000 men, was moving south from Rambouillet to retake Bruyères. The town was a critical road junction. If the Germans took it back, they'd cut off supply lines to 3 American divisions. The 36th Infantry Division, down to about 8,000 effective troops after weeks of brutal fighting, was dug in around the town. They had artillery support, but it was limited. Air support was grounded. Tank support was non-existent on the mountain roads. If the German regiment hit the American line at full strength, with the element of surprise in the fog, the 36th would be overrun. William scanned the valley through his scope, even though he knew it was pointless. All he could see was gray. But in his mind, he was building a map. The sound was coming from the northwest, from the direction of the main valley road. That road, he'd studied the maps, ran straight for about 1,500 yards before it curved south toward Bruyères. The Germans would be marching in column formation, tight and disciplined, using the road because the terrain on either side was too steep and muddy for large unit movement. He calculated distance by sound. The boots hitting cobblestone made a sharp, echoing crack. In fog, sound traveled slower, about 100 feet per second, instead of the usual 1,125. The echo had a delay of about 4 seconds, which meant the source was roughly 1,400 yards, William said aloud. Tommy looked at him. "What?" "The head of the column. It's about 1,400 yards out." Tommy stared. "You can't possibly know that." William didn't respond. He was doing math in his head. 1,400 yards. Springfield, 30.06 round. Muzzle velocity, 2,800 feet per second. Bullet drop at that range, roughly 400 inches. 48 seconds of flight time. No. Wait. 3 seconds. Not 48. Damn fog messing with his brain. He recalculated. Bullet flight time at 1,400 yards, 2.8 seconds. Bullet drop, 33 feet. Wind drift. He couldn't feel wind. The fog was still. That was good. No lateral correction needed. But there was a bigger problem. He couldn't see the target. Tommy was watching him. "Brophy, you're not thinking what I think you're thinking." William adjusted the elevation turret on his scope. 22 clicks up. He knew the scope was fogged over. But the mechanical adjustment still worked. He didn't need to see through the scope. He just needed the barrel angle. "Brophy," Tommy said again, more urgent now. "You can't take a shot. You don't have a target." "I have a sound." "That's not the same thing." It is if you know what you're listening for. The sound was getting louder now. The column was advancing. William could hear the cadence. Left, right, left, right. German infantry on the march. Organized. Confidence. Probably assuming the fog would protect them from American observation. But there was something else. A different sound, layered beneath the boots. A voice. Faint. Rhythmic. Someone calling cadence. An officer, maybe, or an NCO, keeping the troops in step. William closed his eyes and focused on that voice. It was coming from the front of the column. That made sense. Officers led from the front in German doctrine, especially in low visibility conditions. He opened his eyes. If I hit the officer leading the column, they'll stop. Tommy shook his head. You don't know there's an officer. You don't know where the front of the column is. You're guessing. I'm calculating. That's still guessing. William chambered around. The bolt clicked home with a metallic snap. When's the last time you saw me miss? Tommy didn't answer. Because the truth was, he hadn't. Not once. Not in 4 months. William settled into position. He pressed his cheek against the stock, feeling the cold wood against his skin. He controlled his breathing. 4 seconds in, hold for 2, 6 seconds out. His heart rate slowed. The world narrowed. He couldn't use the scope. It was fogged solid. So he used the iron sights instead. A backup set mounted on the side of the rifle. Cruder, less precise, but functional. He aimed high, 30 feet high to account for bullet drop. He aimed at the sound, the rhythmic crunch of boots on stone, the faint voice calling cadence. Tommy whispered, Brophy, if you miss, you're giving away our position. They'll call artillery on this ridge. Then I won't miss it. He took one last breath. Hold it. Felt the trigger under his finger. Applied pressure. Smooth. Steady. No jerk. The rifle fired. The sound was enormous in the stillness. A sharp, cracking boom that echoed off the valley walls. The recoil drove into his shoulder. The muzzle flash briefly lit the fog. And then silence. For 10 seconds nothing happened. The boots kept marching. The voice kept calling cadence. Tommy exhaled. You missed. But William was listening, counting. Bullet flight time, 2.8 seconds. Time for sound to travel back, 4 seconds. Total delay, 6.8 seconds. 6, 7. The boots stopped. A shout. Distant, panicked, then more shouts. Orders being barked in German. Confusion. The entire column, 2,000 men, ground to a halt. Tommy's eyes went wide. What the hell did you just do? William worked the bolt, ejecting the spent casing. It clinked against a rock. He chambered another round, just in case. I stopped them, he said quietly. What William Brophy couldn't see, what no one on the American line could see, was the chaos unfolding 1,400 yards away on the valley road. Oberst, Colonel, Friedrich Decker, commander of the 16th Volksgrenadier Division's lead regiment, had been walking at the head of the column, setting the pace. He was a veteran of the Eastern Front, a careful, methodical officer who believed in leading by example. In the fog, with visibility nearly zero, he'd ordered his men to march in tight formation, using the sound of boots on cobblestone to maintain cohesion. They'd been marching for 2 hours. The fog was perfect cover. Decker was confident the Americans had no idea they were coming. And then his adjutant, walking 3 paces behind him, made a strange sound, half gasp, half grunt, and collapsed. Decker spun around. The adjutant, Hauptmann, Captain, Weber, lay on the road, blood spreading across the front of his tunic. His eyes were wide, staring at nothing. A single bullet hole, center mass, through the heart. For 3 seconds, Decker stood frozen. There had been no sound of a shot, no muzzle flash, just Weber dropping. Then he heard it, a faint echo, rolling down from the ridges above. A rifle shot, distant, maybe 1,000 meters, maybe more. Decker dropped to one knee, scanning the fog. Nothing, just gray. But someone had just killed his adjutant from over a kilometer away, in fog so thick you couldn't see your own hand in front of your face. That was impossible. "Deckung!" Decker shouted. "Take cover!" The entire column, 2,000 men, scattered off the road, diving into ditches, behind trees, into the muddy fields, rifles up, searching for a target they couldn't see. Decker's radio operator crawled up beside him. "Sir, what are our orders?" Decker didn't answer immediately. His mind was racing. Weber had been shot from above. The angle of the wound confirmed it. That meant American snipers on the ridges. But how? In this fog? At that range? He grabbed the radio handset. "All units, halt, advance, hold position. Do not move until the fog lifts." "Sir," the radio operator said, "the attack timetable—" "The timetable is irrelevant if we're walking into an ambush," Decker snapped. "Hold position." He crawled over to Weber's body. The captain was dead, no question. The bullet had entered just below the sternum, angled slightly upward, exited through the back. A perfect shot. Whoever fired it knew exactly what they were doing. Decker looked up at the ridge, hidden somewhere in the gray. He couldn't see it, but he knew the Americans were up there, watching, waiting. For the next 30 minutes, the German column sat frozen on the road. No one moved. Officers whispered into radios. Scouts crept forward, trying to probe American positions. But the fog was too thick. They couldn't see anything. By 0900 hours, the fog was starting to thin. Decker could see 50 yards now, then 100. He ordered his men to prepare to advance, cautiously this time, with scouts forward, heavy weapons ready. But before they could move, American artillery opened up. Shells began falling on the road. Not random fire, but precise, targeted strikes. The Americans knew exactly where the column had stopped. Someone had called in coordinates. The German regiment scattered, taking heavy casualties. The attack on Bruyere was abandoned. Decker ordered a full retreat back to Rambervillers. As his men pulled back, carrying wounded and dragging equipment, Decker stared up at the ridge one last time. The fog was clearing now. He could see the tree line, the rocky outcrops, the ridgeline where the shot had come from. Someone up there had stopped an entire regiment with a single bullet. Decker didn't know the shooter's name, didn't know his rank or unit, but he knew one thing. Whoever that sniper was, he'd just changed the course of the battle. For 6 hours after the shot, William Brophy expected to be arrested. He and Tommy Vickers had stayed on the ridge until the fog cleared, watching German forces retreat north. They'd called in artillery coordinates, adjusting fire as the column scattered. By noon, the valley road was empty, except for abandoned equipment and bodies. When they finally climbed down from the ridge and reported back to their platoon, Lieutenant Corrigan was waiting. "Brophy," Corrigan said, his voice tight. "I heard a rifle shot this morning, around 0730. Single shot, from your sector." William nodded. "Yes, sir." "Did you fire that shot?" "Yes, sir." Corrigan's jaw tightened. "In the fog, with zero visibility. At what range?" "Approximately 1,400 yards, sir." The lieutenant stared at him. "You're telling me you took a 1,400-yard shot, blind, in fog thick enough to hide a tank?" "Yes, sir." "And you hit something?" William hesitated. I hit someone, sir. German officer. Leading the column. Corrigan exhaled slowly. How do you know you hit him? Because the column stopped. I heard it. You heard it? Yes, sir. And then reconnaissance confirmed it. Scouts found a dead German captain on the road, bullet wound, entry from above. Artillery forward observers saw the body before they called in fire. Corrigan looked at Tommy. Vickers, did you authorize this shot? Tommy shook his head. No, sir. I told him not to take it. He took it anyway. Corrigan turned back to William. You disobeyed your spotter. You violated engagement protocols. You fired a shot you couldn't see, couldn't confirm, couldn't possibly calculate in those conditions. William didn't respond. Corrigan leaned closer. You know what the manual says about shots like that? Wasted ammunition, negligent discharge, compromise of position. You could be court-martialed. Yes, sir. But you're not going to be, Corrigan said quietly, because that shot stopped a German regiment. That shot gave us time to call in artillery. That shot saved the 36th Infantry Division from getting overrun. He paused. The battalion commander wants to see you. They're recommending you for a Silver Star. William blinked. Sir? Corrigan shook his head, almost smiling. I don't understand how you did it. I don't understand how it's possible, but reconnaissance confirms it. One shot, one kill, German captain leading the column. The entire regiment stopped, held position for 30 minutes, then retreated under artillery fire. He looked at William for a long moment. How did you know? I listened, sir. That's not an answer. William thought about it. I grew up hunting in the mountains. My father taught me to shoot by sound. You can tell distance by echo. You can tell position by terrain. You can tell what's there even when you can't see it. That's not doctrine. No, sir, but it works. Corrigan was quiet. Then he said, The battalion commander wants you to teach other snipers your methods. Range estimation in low visibility. Shooting by sound. Whatever it is you do. William nodded slowly. I can try, sir. Good. Because we've got 2 more weeks of operations in this fog. And if you can teach even one other shooter to do what you just did, we'll save a lot of American lives. Corrigan turned to leave, then stopped. Brophy, off the record. What were the odds you'd hit that target? William considered the question. In perfect conditions, with a spotter, clear line of sight, no wind, 50-50, maybe. And in the fog, maybe 10%. So you took a shot with a 90% chance of failure. Yes, sir, but the alternative was doing nothing, and that was 100% chance of the Germans hitting our line. Corrigan stared at him. Then he laughed, short, sharp, disbelieving. You're either the luckiest son of a bitch in France, or you're something nobody's figured out how to train yet. William didn't smile. Maybe both, sir. Within a week, every sniper team in the 7 Corps had heard the story. Most of them didn't believe it. A 1,400-yard shot? In fog? Without a spotter confirmation? Impossible. But the reconnaissance photos didn't lie. The body of Hauptmann Weber, photographed by aerial scouts after the fog cleared, showed a single bullet wound consistent with a long-range rifle shot from elevated terrain. The angle, the trajectory, the position of the body, all matched William Brophy's account. More importantly, captured German soldiers confirmed it. During interrogations, survivors from the 16th Volksgrenadier Division described the morning of October 20th. They'd been marching in fog. Their adjutant was walking at the front. And then he dropped, killed by a shot that came from nowhere. One German sergeant said, "We thought it was artillery." But there was no explosion, just our captain dead on the road. We thought the Americans had some new weapons, some rifle that could shoot through fog. Another prisoner said, "The Oberst ordered us to retreat. He said the Americans had the high ground, and we were walking into a trap. If we advanced, we'd all die." The story spread beyond sniper teams. Infantry units started calling William the Fog Ghost. Officers from other divisions requested he be attached to their units for operations in low-visibility terrain. But not everyone was impressed. A sniper instructor from Fort Benning, visiting the front to observe training, reviewed William's shot data and declared it statistically impossible. He calculated that the odds of hitting a man-sized target at 1,400 yards in fog without optical sighting were roughly 1 in 500. This was luck, the instructor wrote in his report. Extraordinary luck, but luck nonetheless. It should not be taught as doctrine. The report was filed away, but by that point William had already trained 6 other sniper teams on his methods. And over the next 4 weeks, 3 of those teams successfully engaged targets in fog using sound-based ranging. None of them made shots as dramatic as William's, but they disrupted German patrols, forced delays, created confusion, all without being able to see their targets. The technique worked, not every time, not even most of the time, but often enough that it changed how American snipers operated in the Vosges. By December, the fog season was over. The campaign moved into clearer terrain, and William Brophy went back to being a regular sniper, taking shots he could see, following doctrine, doing his job. He ended the war with 28 confirmed kills. Respectable but not record-breaking. He received the Silver Star for the October 20th shot, along with a commendation for extraordinary initiative under adverse conditions. But the thing no one recorded, the thing that never made it into official reports, was this. William Brophy fired 47 shots during his time in Europe. 28 confirmed kills, 19 misses, except they weren't misses. They were shots fired at sounds, at calculated positions, at targets he couldn't see. And of those 19, at least 12 resulted in German units halting, retreating, or changing course. No bodies were found, no confirmations. But American units advanced. German attacks stalled. And somewhere in the fog, a Montana hunter turned soldier was rewriting the rules of warfare, one invisible bullet at a time. William Brophy never asked to be famous. He didn't give interviews. He didn't write a memoir. After the war, he went home to Montana, married a girl named Sarah from Missoula, and started a small outfitting business in the Bob Marshall wilderness. He guided hunters, taught tracking, lived quietly. He never once called himself a hero. But the Army didn't forget. Because years after the Vosges campaign, the U.S. Army Marksmanship Unit quietly began studying something they called non-optical target engagement. A fancy term for a simple idea. How do you hit what you can't see? The case study they used, a single engagement outside Bruyères, France. They analyzed terrain, weather conditions, sound propagation, bullet ballistics. They interviewed William Brophy, by then in his 50s, semi-retired, still living in the mountains. "How did you know the target was there?" they asked him. William thought about it for a long time. Then he said, "I didn't know. I guessed. But it was an educated guess." Based on what? Sound, echo, terrain, the way German units move, the way officers position themselves. Can you teach that? William shrugged. Maybe. But it takes time. You have to grow up in the mountains. You have to learn to listen before you learn to see. The instructors didn't understand. They wanted a formula, a manual, a step-by-step process. But William couldn't give them that. What he'd done wasn't science. It was instinct, honed over 20 years of hunting in conditions most people would call impossible. You can't train someone to do what I did, he told them. Not in 6 weeks of sniper school. You'd need a lifetime. They wrote it up anyway. The report, filed in 1967, concluded, while PFC Brophy's engagement demonstrates the theoretical possibility of long-range fire in low-visibility conditions, it is not recommended for doctrinal adoption due to low probability of success and high risk of ammunition waste. In other words, it worked once, but don't try it again. William didn't care. By that point, he was back in Montana, teaching his son to hunt elk, running his business, living the life he'd left behind to fight a war. But every few years, someone would track him down. A military historian, a journalist, a veteran who'd heard the story. They'd ask him about the shot. And William would tell them the same thing. I got lucky. But how did you know where to aim? I listened. But that's all there is, William would say, closing the conversation. I listened, I calculated, I fired. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. One journalist pushed harder. But you stopped an entire regiment. You changed the course of a battle. Don't you think that's significant? William looked at him. I fired 1 bullet. The artillery did the rest. The infantry held the line. The battalion commander made the right calls. I was just one piece. The journalist wrote it up anyway, called William a legend, a ghost, a sniper who could see through fog. William never read the article. Decades later, the U.S. Army tried to replicate William Brophy's shot under controlled conditions. At the Quantico Marine Corps base in 1989, the Marine Scout Sniper School set up a test. They placed man-sized targets at 1/400 yards. They used artificial fog machines to reduce visibility to 30 yards. They brought in 12 of the best snipers in the Corps, men with years of combat experience, perfect qualification scores, advanced training. The challenge: hit the target, using only sound for ranging. Each sniper was given 10 rounds. They could use spotters. They could use the same rifle William had used, a Springfield M1903A4. They were given audio recordings of boot steps on cobblestone, played through speakers positioned near the targets. Out of 120 shots fired, only 3 hit within 10 feet of the target. None hit the target itself. The conclusion: the 1944 engagement by PFC Brophy cannot be reliably reproduced under controlled conditions and should be considered an outlier event. But buried in the report was a note from one of the snipers, a gunnery sergeant named Alvarez. The problem isn't the fog or the range. It's that we're trying to teach a skill that isn't teachable. Brophy didn't calculate the shot. He felt it. And you can't train feeling. That note never made it into official doctrine. But it stuck with the instructors who read it. Because sometimes in war, the difference between impossible and inevitable isn't training. It's not equipment. It's not doctrine. It's one person who grew up in the wilderness, learned to see with his ears, and made a shot that shouldn't have worked, but did. 1 bullet. 1 regiment stopped, 1 battle saved. And decades later, a question no one can answer. Was it luck, or was William Brophy seeing something the rest of the world couldn't? William Brophy died in 2003, at the age of 81, in a hospital in Kalispell, Montana. His obituary in the local paper was 4 sentences long. It mentioned he'd served in World War II, ran an outfitting business, and was survived by his wife, 3 children, and 7 grandchildren. It didn't mention the shot. But at his funeral, 3 men in dress uniform showed up. They weren't family. They weren't friends. They were Marines, snipers, active duty, who'd driven 12 hours from Quantico to pay respects to a man they'd never met. One of them, a staff sergeant named Diaz, left a single bullet on William's casket, a .30-06 round, the same caliber William had fired in France. Sarah Brophy asked who they were. "Ma'am," Diaz said, "your husband did something in the war that no one else has ever done. We study it. We talk about it. We try to understand it. And we wanted to be here." Sarah nodded. She'd known about the shot. William had told her once, years ago, late at night after too much whiskey. But he'd never talked about it publicly, never bragged, never let anyone make him into something he wasn't. "He wouldn't have wanted this attention," Sarah said softly. Diaz nodded. "I know, ma'am. But we needed to say thank you." Because William Brophy, hunter, soldier, guide, had reminded the military of something they sometimes forgot. Sometimes the best warriors aren't the ones who follow every rule. They're the ones who know when to break them. Sometimes the best shot isn't the one you see. It's the one you trust. And sometimes the impossible is just another word for no one else has tried it yet. One man, one rifle, one shot fired blind into the fog, and an entire regiment that learned fear isn't always something you see. It's something you hear, echoing from the ridges above, reminding you that death can come from anywhere, even from a place you can't see, even from a man you'll never meet, even from a bullet that traveled 1,400 yards through fog to stop a war, if only for one morning, if only long enough to save the men who needed saving. That's the legacy of William Brophy. Not fame, not glory, just one impossible shot that worked. And the quiet knowledge that sometimes survival is a matter of listening to what the world is telling you, and trusting that when you pull the trigger, the bullet will find its mark. Even when you can't see it. Especially then,